Shalom, Pasadenans. It is I, your friendly neighborhood Rabbi John Carrier, delighted to be counting the Omer with you here at PJTC. Tonight, after the sun goes down, we're going to be counting day number 19 of the Omer. And just to tee you up for that experience, I'm going to have a question for the 19th day of the Omer. And the question of the day is, when has Tiferet been important in our history? And as I was thinking of my own answer for this question, I realized that it's kind of tricky to identify moments of balance, because usually balance makes things go smoothly, and history is more often about when things don't go so smoothly. Balance is most often noticed in the breach. Earlier this week, I was studying with one of my B'nai Mitzvah students who has Parashat Chukat for his Torah portion. Parashat Chukat has one of the most tragic scenes in my mind in all of the Torah, and it's about a lack of Tiferet. It's a story like many other stories in the Torah where the Israelites are complaining to Moses. Miriam has just passed away. Their source of water has dried up. And so, of course, everybody's like, we want water. I don't know if they didn't speak English, but you get the idea. And Moses goes to God. God says, I want you to take your stick and I want you to speak to the rock, and the water will start flowing out of the rock and everybody will stop complaining. So Moses is like, okay, grabs his stick, goes back. The people are still complaining and he loses it. He says, you rebels, you want water, I'll show you water. And he takes his stick and he whacks the rock, and water starts flowing out of the rock and people drink and they stop complaining. And then God's like, yeah. Remember when I told you to speak to the rock and you hit the rock? Can't be having that. And so, Moses, you don't get to go into the promised land. And in my mind, this is one of the great tragedies of our people's narrative, is that this leader who's been with them from Egypt to the edge of the promised land, with them for 40 years through the wilderness, helped get all their needs met, talked one-on-one with God. This guy's done his time. He does not get to go into the promised land because of a single moment of losing his temper. Just as we heard in the story of God praying to God's self and saying, I hope my mercy outweighs my anger, Moses let his anger get the better of him. He let his anger get out of balance. And God decided to make a very important lesson out of that. That's what I mean to say that we most often notice Tiferet in its breach. However, there is a very important point in Jewish history that I think exemplifies Tiferet in a more positive way. As you're watching this in the beginning of the 19th day of the Omer, we are just coming out of Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day. And Yom HaAtzmaut, this Israeli Independence Day, always has me thinking back to the first time I read the Declaration for the Establishment of the State of Israel, kind of like Israel's version of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution all rolled into one. And this document begins by examining the sweep of Jewish history, our connection to the Torah, our connection to the land, even recent events in Jewish history. At that point, the Shoah, the Holocaust, was fresh in everybody's memory. And all of these different threads culminating in the establishment in the modern state of Israel. And then it lists out the fundamental rights that would accrue to citizens of this new land. And one of them that jumps off the page at me is this paragraph that talks about how every citizen of Israel is guaranteed the right to the free expression of their own religion, whatever that religion happens to be. And when I think of this great miracle in history of this establishment of a modern Jewish state, fresh off the experience of the Shoah, the ultimate expression of intolerance, for the founders of Israel to turn that around and say, look, we're going to separate ourselves from that kind of ugliness. We're going to make it clear to everybody that one of our founding principles is religious tolerance. And this, to me, is one of the ultimate expressions of Tiferet in our history, this exercise of gevurah, might, and judgment in establishing the state, at the same time, a loving kindness and openness to all of its citizens. And look, I know there's so much in contemporary Israeli politics that is controversial. People might argue with me on how this has been expressed. Nevertheless, just as we were moving into the day right after Yom HaAtzmaut and talking about this attribute of Tiferet or balance, I wanted to notice this incredible expression of Tiferet in the foundational documents in the history of the state of Israel. Just as in the case of Moses losing his balance, losing his temper, striking the rock, Tiferet is often something that is aspirational and most noticed in its breach. At the same time, every once in a while, it comes to beautiful fruition and sets an example for all of us. So my question for you today is, when have you noticed Tiferet working? What critical points in history have happened because either Tiferet was there or because Tiferet was not when it could have been? I'm curious to hear your reflections on this. Put them in the comments in the Facebook section, put them in the YouTube comments, email me back, write it down in your journal, however you want to express it. Don't forget to count day 19 of the Omer after sundown tonight. And until next time, Pasadenians, shalom.